In the heart of Wall Street, James Miller seemed to have it all: wealth, power, and a name inherited through generations. But an unexpected encounter in a forgotten neighborhood opens cracks in his empire, revealing secrets capable of redefining his life, his faith, and the true meaning of legacy. The golden rays of the setting sun streamed through the large windows of James Miller's office, tinting the framed certificates and awards adorning the walls with an amber hue. A financial empire of glass and steel, 30 stories above the city's hustle and bustle. From there, people looked like ants, just as his father, Richard Miller, had always taught him to see them. Never show weakness, son. In the business world, you are either the predator or the prey. James adjusted his Italian silk tie in front of the mirror, observing the 35-year-old man staring back at him. Impeccable attire, perfectly cut hair, a Swiss watch that cost more than a luxury car. Everything about him screamed success. But his eyes told a different story, a deep void that no corporate acquisition could fill. The door opened, and his assistant, Sophia, came in with a stack of documents. "Mr. Miller, the Parker merger contracts are ready for your signature, and your father called. Twice." James took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of those words. Richard Miller, the patriarch of the financial dynasty, had clear expectations about the empire he had built. "Tell him I'll return later," he replied automatically. When Sophia left, James took out the small photo frame hidden in the drawer. In it, a woman with a gentle smile and bright eyes held a 5-year-old boy. Elizabeth Miller, the only person who never saw James as an heir, but simply as her son. The only one who spoke to him about compassion, about a God who cared, about a life that was worth more than titles or shares. 15 years had passed since her funeral. 15 years since that gentle voice had been silenced, leaving only Richard and his lessons of ruthlessness to shape their son. James put the photo away, swallowing the lump in his throat. Feelings were luxuries that men like him could not afford. The silver Bentley glided through the wide, tree-lined streets of the financial district when a metallic snap cut through the air, followed by a hiss and a cloud of smoke rising from the engine. "I can't believe it," James muttered irritably, as the driver pulled over at the entrance of a visibly simpler neighborhood. Small houses, some in need of painting, children playing ball in the street. A world completely different from the mansions and gated communities he frequented. "I'm sorry, sir." The driver seemed genuinely concerned. "I've already called for service, but it could take an hour." James huffed, getting out of the car to stretch his legs. The humid July heat made his Italian suit stick to his back. Feeling as out of place as a penguin in the desert, he surveyed the neighborhood around him, checking his watch impatiently every few minutes. That's when he saw the boy. Sitting on the worn sidewalk, a black boy of about 10 years old was completely absorbed in something in his hands. He wore simple but clean clothes, and his face displayed intense concentration as he manipulated what seemed to be a mixture of carved wood and rusty gears. Driven by a displaced curiosity, James approached. The shadow of his body made the boy look up, dark eyes curiously serene. "What crap is that?" asked James with a mocking smile on his lips. The boy was not offended. He simply turned the strange object in his hands, allowing the sun to illuminate the partially broken small gears. "It's not crap, sir. It's an invention." His voice was clear, confident. "It's broken, but when it works, it will move things without batteries or electricity. My grandfather said that God gives gifts even to those who are forgotten." James laughed, but there was no genuine humor in his laughter. "Looks like garbage to me. You should be playing video games like the other kids." The boy smiled, a smile that didn't belong to a child his age. It had too much wisdom. "We don't have money for video games. But my grandfather taught me that imagination costs nothing." Something in those words pierced through the carefully constructed layers of James. He felt a growing discomfort, as if that boy could see through his facade. "What's your name?" he asked, surprising himself. "Caleb Johnson, sir." The service arrived at that moment, sparing James from continuing the conversation. He nodded briefly to the boy and returned to his world of meetings and numbers. But throughout the whole afternoon, the strange object and the boy's serene eyes remained in his mind like an insistent melody that refuses to be forgotten. That night in his silent and perfectly decorated penthouse, James couldn't sleep. He poured himself a glass of expensive whiskey and walked to the panoramic window. The city glowed below, a sea of lights that normally made him feel powerful. But today, each light seemed like a question for which he had no answer. He closed his eyes and long-buried memories emerged, his mother holding his small hand as they walked to church on Sundays, her gentle voice reading stories about compassion, forgiveness, and a man who valued children and ordinary people. "Mama, why does Daddy never come to church with us?" he had asked once. Elizabeth smiled with a sadness that only now he understood. "Your father believes in things he can see and touch, James. But there are truths that the eyes cannot see." After her death, Richard took over his son's upbringing entirely. Visits to the church stopped. Stories of compassion were replaced by lessons on competition and power. And James, desperately wanting his father's approval, buried his mother's memories along with his childhood faith. The sound of the cell phone interrupted his thoughts. The identifier showed Richard Miller. James hesitated, then rejected the call. For the first time in years, he did not want to hear his father's voice. 3 days later, to his own surprise, James was back in that simple neighborhood. He convinced himself it was just curiosity. After all, what kind of homemade toy could move things without batteries? He found Caleb in the same spot, as if time had not passed. This time, the boy was accompanied by an elderly man with white hair, sitting in a worn-out wheelchair. "Mr. Miller," Caleb exclaimed, recognizing him immediately. "Did you come back to see my invention?" James felt his face flush slightly, embarrassed by his transparency. "Actually, yes," he admitted, stepping closer. "I was intrigued." The elderly man smiled, extending a wrinkled hand. "William Johnson, I see you've met my grandson." William's hand was rough, marked by decades of manual labor, the complete opposite of the manicured hands James was accustomed to shaking in meeting rooms. "May I see your project?" James asked, turning to Caleb. The boy handed over the object carefully. It was heavier than it looked, with intricate details despite its deteriorated state. Some gears were rusted, others missing, but there was a design that suggested purpose and ingenuity. "My great-grandfather invented this," Caleb explained proudly. "He was a scientist, even if no one recognized him as such. I found it among Grandpa's belongings, and I'm trying to fix it." William nodded slowly. "My father was a man ahead of his time. Unfortunately, doors closed quickly for black men with revolutionary ideas back then." Something in the story caused a slight discomfort in James. "Can I take this to a specialist? I promise to return it." Caleb's eyes sparkled with hope, but William seemed hesitant. "It's our only memory of him," said the elderly man. "I promise to take good care of it," James assured, feeling an unusual sincerity in his words. After a brief hesitation, William nodded. "I trust you, Mr. Miller." Those words weighed more than any contract he had ever signed. "It's extraordinary," said Dr. Feinberg, examining the object through a special magnifying glass. "Based on the design and materials, this was created about 70 years ago. But the most impressive aspect is the concept." James watched attentively as the retired engineer, a specialist in the history of technology who occasionally consulted for his company. "What's special about it?" "This device," Feinberg explained, "appears to be an early prototype for a self-sustaining kinetic energy generator. Simply put, it transforms motion into continuous energy with minimal loss. The principle is decades ahead of its time." James felt a shiver. "Who created it?" "Well, based on the initials engraved here," Feinberg pointed to almost invisible letters on the wooden base. "G.J. It's not familiar to me, but—" Feinberg stopped abruptly, frowning. "Wait, Johnson. G. Johnson. There's something familiar." He got up and went to his bookshelf, pulling out a thick book on the history of engineering. He quickly flipped through it until he found what he was looking for. Here, George Johnson, a practically unknown inventor who submitted some patents in the 50s. There's a curious note about a specific patent that was disputed and eventually attributed to. Feinberg looked up from the book, a look of recognition on his face. Attributed to Alexander Miller. I presume he's a relative of yours. James's blood ran cold in his veins. Alexander Miller, his grandfather. The man who had laid the foundations of the family's financial empire, even before Richard expanded the business. I need to go, he said abruptly, gathering the object. In the car, with the strange invention in his lap, James accessed the company's files on his tablet. Hours later, the truth was clear as crystal. Alexander Miller had not only contested the patent, he had manipulated the system, using contacts and money to erase George Johnson from history and claim the invention for himself. That technology had become the foundation for one of Miller Enterprises' first major acquisitions. The emptiness in James's stomach was not just guilt. It was the dizzying sensation that his entire life, all his privilege, was built on a lie. That night, alone in his penthouse, James did something he hadn't done since childhood. He knelt by the side of the bed. God, if you really exist, show me what to do. The words came out awkward, rusty from disuse, but something about that simple phrase, that request for direction, stirred a strange feeling in his chest, as if a very old knot was beginning to loosen. He slept deeply for the first time in years. The next morning, James drove his own car to Caleb's neighborhood. He found William and the grandson on the small porch of the modest house where they lived. Mr. Miller, Caleb smiled, but the smile disappeared when he saw James's serious expression. We need to talk, said James, sitting in the simple chair they offered him. With a trembling voice, he revealed everything. The discovery of the true origin of the invention, his grandfather's fraud, how part of the Miller fortune had been built on that injustice. With each word, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, even as another grew in his heart. When he finished, he expected to see anger, indignation, perhaps even threats of a lawsuit. Instead, he saw William Johnson wipe away a silent tear. My father died believing that no one valued his work, said the elderly man with a trembling voice. He died thinking he was a failure. James lowered his head, shame burning his face. I can't change the past, but I can try to right this wrong now. William sighed deeply, looking at the small yard where other children were playing. Generations have passed, son. Resentment only imprisons. Leave justice to God. Caleb, who had been silent, finally spoke. You can live for yourself, or you can use your life to change the world. The boy's words hit James like a lightning bolt. At that moment, he clearly saw the contrast between the life he was leading, amassing wealth, power, and prestige, and the possibility of something more meaningful. I have an idea, he said slowly, as a plan formed in his mind. A week later, the largest auditorium in the financial district was packed. Investors, journalists, and high-ranking executives filled the rows of seats, murmuring in anticipation. Richard Miller, sitting in the front row, displayed a proud expression. His son was finally going to announce the biggest acquisition in the company's history. James stepped onto the stage with his heart pounding. He was impeccably dressed as always, but something in his eyes had changed. Behind him, a giant screen displayed the Miller Enterprises logo. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice echoing through the sound system. Today I am not here to announce an acquisition. I am here to tell a truth. A confused silence took over the auditorium. In the back, Caleb and William Johnson watched attentively, special guests that afternoon. For a moment, James almost stepped back. The furious look from his father in the front row was exactly what he had feared his whole life. But then, like a flash, he remembered his mother, her gentle smile, her hands holding the battered Bible she read to him before bed. Part of my fortune was born from an injustice, he continued with a firm voice. Today I choose to amend that. In the following minutes, he revealed the full story of George Johnson's invention. The words now flowed without hesitation. while the screen behind him displayed documents and old photos of the true inventor. "I am creating the Johnson Foundation," he finally announced, "in honor of the true inventor, to support young people like Caleb, who possess talents the world insists on ignoring. Furthermore, Miller Enterprises will officially recognize George Johnson as the creator of the technology and pay retroactive royalties to his family." The auditorium plunged into silence, broken only by the flashes of cameras. Richard Miller stood up abruptly and left, but James barely noticed his absence. At the back of the hall, Caleb raised the toy now restored by the company's best engineers. The gears turned smoothly, generating energy from their own movement, reflecting a beam of golden light that crossed the room. Months later, the Johnson Foundation had already awarded scholarships to dozens of young inventors from underprivileged communities. George Johnson's small prototype was displayed in the city's new Innovation Museum, with his name duly credited. Richard Miller had cut ties with his son, but for the first time, James didn't care about his father's disapproval. One autumn afternoon, he visited his mother's grave, placing fresh flowers on the simple headstone. "I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me," he whispered, the wind gently stirring his hair. "There are things more important than money or power." As he turned to leave, he saw Caleb and William waiting a few meters away. The boy waved, a smile lighting up his face. "Ready for our engineering class, Mr. Miller?" asked Caleb, proudly holding his sketchbook. James smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Always ready to learn from you, Professor Johnson." As they walked together through the cemetery, James understood that what appeared to be the end of a life, the loss of his fortune, the estrangement from his father, the fall of his status, was actually the beginning of something much more valuable. What was broken could be restored, what was stolen could be returned, and what seemed forgotten by men was never forgotten by God.